Welcome to the session on working capital management with special reference to small and medium enterprises. We have been discussing the working capital management typically in the setup of a manufacturing firm and typically for a large corporation, all the functions that happen in a large manufacturing firm. Today, we'll focus our attention on the small and medium scale enterprises and how the working capital management plays a role in the effective, in the success of this kind of, firms. Now, before we go to the working capital management in small and medium, let us have just a first-hand discussion on what are these firms and which are the firms which are under this MSME category. That is the micro, small, medium enterprises. So, which are the firms which fall under this particular category? Now, this sector has emerged as a very important one for the economy, and it has also contributed significantly towards generating jobs, creating innovations, contributing towards export, uh, and talking about the financial inclusion and growth of economy. This sector has contributed immensely. This it will be also worthwhile to say that this has become one of the big backbone of the economic development of our country. In fact, the out of the total industrial production, the MSME sector contributes about 45% towards that, and 40% of the total exports are contributed by the MSME sector. And in fact, if you talk about the GDP figures, the total GDP contribution of MSME is more than 37%, out of which 7%, around 7% is in manufacturing sector, and rest 30% is in the service sector. So we can imagine what an important sector this MSME must be, which is contributing more than 37% to the GDP of our country. Now, when we were talking about which are the firms which could be under the small and medium enterprises. Now, this concept of this micro, small, and medium enterprises, it was initiated and through an act which is called the MSME Act 2006. And this act was in fact enacted to provide the policy, regulations, and the overall guiding principle, and create an environment in which we can promote the micro and small enterprises, and how the development of individuals can happen and the inclusion of individuals can happen through this sector. The act is very specific about that. Now, which are the companies that can be classified as micro, small, or see, when this act was enacted, this amount was very small, but this classification, the qualification of the companies to be classified under MSME, that keeps on changing every 5-10 years. And we'll talk about the most recent classification scheme. So I have taken the 2020 classification scheme. Now, the companies can be classified as a micro farm if it has plant and machinery equipment. The worth of plant and machinery is below 1 crore, and it has an annual turnover which is not exceeding 5 crore. That means below 5 crore annual turnover, and plant and machinery cost below 1 crore, that can be called as a micro enterprise. Whereas for a farm to be classified as a small enterprise, the machinery and plant value should be less than 10 crore and the turnover should be less than 50 crore. Whereas for a medium enterprise, it is plant and machinery is 50 crore, whereas the turnover should not be more than 250 crore. If it is beyond 250 crore, then it is a large enterprise. Okay. So this is the most recent classification of the small scale industries in India. Then we talk about the difference between the small and medium enterprise and the large companies. Now you see the SMEs, they have a typical advantage over the large scale competitors. Why? Because they're I mean the SMEs, they are very quick to adopt the modern technologies. So I mean, because the large organizations by virtue of their size, the change to be implemented in a large organization is quite slow, whereas the SMEs can quickly implement technological changes and incorporate the new technology into their operation. So because of that, they can adjust to the market situation really quickly. So if some technology is going obsolete or a new technology is coming in, it is the SMEs can quickly capitalize on that. Now, the as compared to the larger corporations, of course. Now, the SME, it can also withstand the unfavorable economic situation because they're quite flexible, because the by virtue of their size, they can quickly adjust to the economic conditions, favorable as well as unfavorable. Their large companies are more capital intensive. They are more dependent on the machinery, whereas these SMEs are more labor intensive. So that is why they have a low cost of capital associated with the job creation. Now the SMEs also, their market share is very less. So when I am talking about a market presence, I basically say that the operation, this scope of operation, the market share and all that is very less. So that is why they are able to, they're not subject to too many regulations, various regulations put up by the government. They're not subject to those regulations, and they have a certain leeway why when it comes to making adjustments to various business processes. Whereas for larger firms, all forms of regulations are applicable to them. So they have to deal with a plethora of rules and regulations, and regulation regarding like under the Companies Act, the, let us say, Factories Act, the various kinds of regulations. So you have to, the safety precautions and all that, all these regulations are applicable to larger firms. And so that is why they find it very difficult to, negotiate these rules and regulations and make suitable changes. Whereas the SMEs, because of their lesser market presence, they can suitably negotiate these regulation rules and regulations. I can make quick changes to their business processes. So basically, the essence of this discussion is SMEs. They are quite flexible in nature. Okay, so that will also reflect in the working capital management of this kind of firms. Now, when we talk about the importance of the working capital management in the small scale, now it is very critical. I mean, for the working capital management, which is day-to-day business operations, looking after that is quite critical for these SMEs, because you see the why it is more important. If you talk about the some of the points, then you talk about the cash flow. Now the SMEs have limited access to external financing, and so that is why it is very essential for them to manage the cash flow accordingly. Now the that is why the work cash management has to be perfect, because you don't have access to the financial market, you don't have access to much of the lots of, for example, it is a money market, so you don't have access to these things. So the cash flow management has to be very good. Then you talk about the efficient working capital management. It also allows the SME to optimize their operations. If, for example, for management of inventory, you have to prevent the excess of stock and the chances of the stock out. So if you are able to do that, then the operational efficiency will increase. Then you talk about these supplier relationships. The timely payment to suppliers are very crucial to these kind of companies, because you have to maintain good relationship with your suppliers. You have to secure favorable credit terms, and you have to negotiate the various kinds of discounts. So then you have to have a good customer relationship. Now, because you have to collect the account receivables that you have created, so in order to maintain a healthy cash flow, you need to collect the receivables. quickly. So this will require a very diligent monitoring and the collection efforts. So to manage the accounts effectively, you have to have a very good customer relationship with your client base. You have to again minimize the finance cost. Now you have to rely on very short line on short term loans or line of credit to cover your working capital needs. So you have to optimize the working capital requirement and have to minimize the financing cost to be effective in this thing. Now we talked about the flexibility and adaptability. Now SMEs are quite flexible by virtue of their market share and by virtue of their size. When we talk about investment opportunities, the if you have any surplus cash, you can always invest that in suitable ventures, or if you are making good profit, and you can invest in your business to make it grow. So that is there with the SMEs. You have to talk about the risk mitigation, because the SMEs are very vulnerable to economics uncertainties and market fluctuations. So there could be so many unexpected events that will have big impact on the SME. Then you talk about the credit worthiness. So banks and the other kind of lenders, they always assess the SME's working capital position when they are actually taking a decision on their loan application. So it is utmost importance for the SME to maintain the credit worthiness. Then you talk about the sustainable operations, because SMEs most frequently they operate on the very tight profit margin. So in order to be effective, you have to ensure long-term sustainability of your operations. So you have to look at the sustainability as well. Then you talk also there is involved the strategic planning. Now the working capital management will always provide you valuable insights into the strategic decision making. So it will identify the SME to it will help the SME to identify the specific areas where it needs improvement, and this knowledge you can get through the appropriate management of working capital. So when we talk about this working capital management, now the role of SME, we have understood that it is very important. Now when we talk about this working capital management of SMEs, it is very crucial, because you see the working capital management is all about what kind of customer relationship you have. You will, what kind of a credit line you will be granting, what kind of relationship you will have your suppliers. So these are the things which will play a big role in the success of an SME. So working capital decision is very, very crucial. Probably for a larger fund, you can say that the investment and the financing decision could play a big role. But for a SME, it is a working capital management which plays a major role. Now, we all know that there is something called a working capital cycle. Now, in this cycle, that you can basically identify the three stages. The inventory stage, the accounts receivable stage, and the next one is the accounts payable stage. I think during this course we have already discussed the various stages. Like you invest cash to buy the raw material, and the raw material is processed. It goes into the manufacturing process. Through the working process, it becomes a finished good. The finished good stays like a finished good until it is sold. It is actually sold to the customer, and with the point of sale, you create an accounts receivable. Then the accounts receivable goes through the collection department, and then you come back to the cash again. So the three important aspects of a working capital cycle for the SME, what they have to look for is, number one is your the inventory part. Number two is what kind of credit you are giving, and the what kind of receivable, how many days receivable you are having. Similarly, what kind of a supply relationship you have through which you are getting the credit. So you also have to look at the accounts payable that you are having. And nevertheless, it is needless to say that in all these three things, the cash management is of utmost importance. So when we're talking about the SME, we are looking at the three working capital components, basically the inventory part, the account receivable part, and the payable part through the angle of the cash management. Okay. Now, what should be the, goal of the working capital manager for an SME? Now, you see, the working capital and the liquidity of your farm, as they are going to be very linked. Now, due to which the working capital, good working capital, it has to ensure that the company always has enough amount of cash on hand to meet all of its short-term obligations, and that is also sufficient to run your day-to-day operation. Now you see, if you have when we're talking about working capital, all the current assets are working capital. For example, even inventory is working capital, the bills receivable is a working capital. But the point is, when your creditor comes up with an invoice, you're going to pay it through cash. We are not going to use the other current assets to make the payment. We are going to make it through cash. So the first and foremost goal for the working capital manager in a SME is going to be the availability of adequate amount of cash. I'm not saying excess, too much of cash, but it has to be adequate amount of cash, so that as and when there is a demand on you for payment, you can smoothly meet that kind of a demand. There should be a link between the profitability and the working capital also. This is something that we call the risk and profitability trade-off. So because the cost of financing of the firm's current assets, the amount of capital, it has an impact on the profitability and the working capital. So there is a definite link between the profitability and the liquidity part. Now, if you compromise the profitability, you gain on liquidity, and if you compromise the liquidity, you gain on profitability. So there is also many evidence that the SMEs are quite poor at managing their working capital, which is why we are having a special session for this working capital management of the SMEs. Now you see, when I was talking about this trade-off, now all this financial decision making, the ultimate objective of the financial decision making is shareholder value creation. Okay. Now, when we're talking about shareholder value creation, all these decisions that we're taking in the financial domain, it should ensure that the we're having a good amount of, we're having generating positive NPV through them. Now, when we're talking about shareholder value in terms of working capital management, we all know that working capital management is within a year. So the NPV, or the time value of money, does not play a big role in working capital management. But then how does this kind of a decision contribute towards shareholder value? The contribution is the short-term one, and it is through this risk and profitability trade-off that the working capital contributes to the shareholder value. Now, what is the meaning of actually the risk and profitability trade-off? You see, when we're talking about risk, or we were talking about risk in another session of this capital projects, there the concept of risk is different. Okay, for example, in that case, the concept of risk is the variability of your cash flow. Okay, but when we're talking about working capital management, the concept of risk is completely different. Now, what is the meaning of risk in working capital management? The risk means that whether you are able to make payment on time or not. Okay, so if you are not able to make payment on time, then you lose out on your credit worthiness, and if you are making payment on time, then you have good amount of credit worthiness. So the risk in the domain of working capital management, it means that you should have enough liquidity to make timely payments to safeguard your credit worthiness. Now, so when we talk about risk, we mean basically the lack of liquidity, right? So if you have liquidity, your risk. If you have high liquidity, your risk is low. If you have low liquidity, your risk is high, because then it will have high liquidity safeguards your credit worthiness, so there is no risk. Low liquidity impacts your credit worthiness, and that is risk. Now the point is, risk is, we're talking about liquidity. Then when we talk about this profitability, profitability is if you have surplus amount of money, I mean idle money, then you lose out on the return that you could have generated on that amount of cash. So then you have low profit. Now see, you can have, these are the two ends of continuum. You can either have high liquidity, keep sufficient amount of cash so that your liquidity is very high, so that at any point of time you can make payment, so your liquidity is high, your risk is low. But at the same time, the idle cash does not generate any return on it as such. So the idle cash will result in low profitability. So the here the when we're talking about this trade-off, the trade-off means if you want to have low risk, you have to settle for low profitability. Now, because low risk, how can you have low risk? Through high liquidity. Now, if you have high liquidity, you will have low profitability. So low risk will have to be accompanied by low profitability, and high risk will have to be accompanied by high profitability. Now, how can we achieve this particular trade-off? You can do so through the current asset policy. For example, with how much of your money you want to put in the current asset, because current asset as such generates lesser rate of return. So if you have too much of current asset, your profitability will be low. Now, when I say too much of current asset, I am basically trying to say too much of inventory, too much of cash, too much of receivable, I mean debtors. At the same time, if you have lesser amount of current asset, then you have to manage the farm in an aggressive manner, so that less amount of inventory, less amount of cash, less amount of debtors. So you have to be always on your toes. Now, the same thing you can achieve, this trade-off you can do through the financing policy. For example, now, if do you want to depend on the long-term source or the short-term source? Now, you see, long-term source is easier to manage for the finance manager, because he depends on the long-term source. It is you have the long-term source of capital, such as the equity available, the debentures available, the terms loans available. So that is an easy source of finance, but it has a high cost. Whereas in case of the short-term financing, like short-term bank loans and all this, now in case of short-term financing, the rate of interest is low, but you have to arrange, you have to be very aggressive to arrange the short-term loan. Now, if you want to become relaxed, you depend on the long-term loan and pay more, so your profitability will be low. If you want to be on your toes because you want to increase your profitability, you depend on the short-term loan and you pay lesser amount of interest, and your profitability will be high. So this risk and profitability trade-off can be achieved through the current asset policy as well as through the financing policy. And you see, these things will ultimately contribute towards the shareholder value. If you are able to manage your farm without hampering your credit worthiness, with high profitability, that is low liquidity and short-term sources of finance, then you will definitely add to the shareholder value. Now, this is how the working capital of the small and medium enterprises, it has to be looked at from this particular angle to be able to, compatible with the overall farm's objective of achieving growth in future, of becoming big in future, and at the same time staying profitable. Now, having discussed this shareholder value creation, we now talk about the what kind of, for example, the optimization that is required to in the working capital for the SMEs. Now, what should be done to see? There are no fixed norms of what should be done in case of working capital management. Now, what should be the level of working capital? There is no fixed norm. There is no thumb rule for that. Now, you have to evaluate the various kinds of scenarios that you are operating in, and then you have to the monetary, the economic, the competitive environment that you are operating in, and then you have to decide what should be the optimal level of working capital in the SME. See, while we are looking to optimize the working capital, we can always look at these two aspects. Number one is your customer and the kind of competition that you have. Rivalry basically means the competition that you have, that you are operating in, and then the kind of relationship that you are nurturing with your suppliers. Now, when we're talking about the clients and the competition, now you see the fear of compromising the relationship and the revenue if you pursue the customer for payment very aggressively. So now the thing is that if you are suppose you are operating with low liquidity, that means there is less amount of cash available with you. So if you have less amount of cash, then and the customer is not making the payment, then you will pursue the client aggressively because you yourself need the cash. Correct. So if you do that aggressively, there is a chance that you will have a strained relationship with your client. Now, why would you do that? Because you need cash and you are operating on a very low level of cash. Well, now your competitor in this scenario, suppose the due date of payment was on, let us say, 5th of June, right? Now, on 5th of June, if your customer has not made a payment, you continuously pursue the client for next 1 week, okay? And you bother him with messages and emails and phone calls in the next week. So there is every possibility that he will, make your payment, but there is also every possibility that he might not choose to do business with you in future. At the same time, suppose you have a competitor, and on 5th of June, he was due to make the payment. He will make a very polite, he'll send a very polite message that today is your due date. Now, in next 7 days time, the next week, he sends out one or two messages, and that very polite messages. So, do you think that the client will do business with you, who is pestering him for payment, or with the competitor who is very relaxed in his approach to the collection? Okay, so if you are in that case, you will lose your customer to the competitor. So if your market is very competitive, then you cannot be too aggressive in your collection, because the market is, you don't bother about your losing out a client, because you know that there are few players in the market, you will get clients as it is. So if the competitive environment is not that tough, then you can have a tight collection policy. But if you're operating in a very very competitive environment and acquiring a client is a big deal in the market, then you definitely not want to lose out on a client, and then you have to approach the working capital management in that way. Like what are the competitive environment in which you are operating. Now, so that there could be a fear of drop in customer service if your inventory levels aren't high. Now, for example, suppose you walk into a shop to purchase a washing machine, okay? And we all know that people are not very brand loyal while you are talking about the FMCD, the fast moving consumer durables. Now, you walk into a shop, suppose you had in mind to buy X brand of washing machine, okay, and you work and you are a busy person, you have taken out time for today's evening to make the procurement, and when you walk into the showroom, you find that the brand X of washing machine that you had initially thought of in your mind is not available in the showroom. So then the showroom will give you plenty of options in other brands, A, B, C, and other kind of brands. Will show you plenty of options. Now, X is absent, X you wanted to buy, but X is absent. Now you have plenty of options, A, B, C, D, and all that. So now, do you think that you will come back without purchasing X? No, you will end up buying a different brand of washing machine that day itself. Now, see, what will happen is if the company X did not bother to maintain sufficient amount of finished good inventory with the retail store. So in the effect, it will lose out on a client. Okay. So because your inventory levels aren't high. This is the example of a finished good inventory. There could be several examples of this due to the lack of raw material inventory, due to the lack of work in process. You are not able to take advantage of this sudden spot in the demand. Now the customers, you grant them discounts. Okay, even if you don't pay, if they don't pay on time, you grant them discount. When can you do that? You can do that if you have, I mean, high amount of liquidity. I mean, high amount of cash, high amount of, and if your competitor is doing that, then you lose the client to the competitor. You are in the business to acquire to clients, but if you keep on losing our clients to the competitor, then we definitely need to look at the working capital management of our company. Okay, similarly, the longer payment term, suppose you are offering a 30-day credit term, your competitors are offering a 45-day credit term, then also you lose the client to the customer, I mean to the competitor. Then we talk about the suppliers. Now you see, the suppliers also have a very dominant position here. Now you need to have concerns about how your suppliers will react, and the what kind of a disruption will happen to the supply due to the if you decide on your own that you are going to, let us say, tinker with your payment terms. Okay, so for example, you have been purchasing raw material on a 60-day credit basis. Now you decided that no, I will not make the payment on 60th day, I will make the payment on 75th day. So this is a unilateral decision on your part to extend the credit term. Now this will have an impact on the disruption that you are causing to the supplier's side. So you have to be very aware about what kind of reaction the supplier will have due to this. Okay, because next time when you want to buy raw material from him, he might not give you the credit. Okay, he might ask you to pay on, I mean, trade on cash, or he might not supply to you. Okay, now there will also be negative media impact on the organization's reputation if the payment terms are extended and for the minor suppliers. Now we have seen several examples in the past where due to the lack of payment on time, there has been media outcry. For example, a big organization has not made the electricity bill payment on time. This is going to be a big issue in the market. Okay, so you have to be very concerned about these things. And so the working capital decision that you are going to have, how much of working capital you are going to have, is a factor that you have to look at all these things before deciding how much of working capital you need to actually maintain with your farm. Now, the other thing is your control and accountability, and what kind of advantages you are getting out of it. Now, when we talk about this control and accountability, now the importance of cash is not reflected in individual or organizational performance measurements. Okay, now because you see, if you are having cash or not having cash, nobody is bothered about that. But if you are not having cash or having huge amount of cash, it has absolutely no role in the organizational performance. But if you do not have cash, then your credit worthiness will suffer, right? So working capital is a very complex topic, and there are so many functional areas, so where you cannot have I mean single authority to look after these things. If you do not have cash, there might be so many things that will go wrong, but having cash does not mean that the organizational performance is good. Like if you have cash, salary payment on time, you make all the bills payment on time. But if you do not, making payments on time is by no means a measure of organizational performance. But if you do not have cash, then your employees will be dissatisfied, your supplier will be dissatisfied, or your clients will be dissatisfied. Ultimately, in the long run, that will lead to bad performance of the company. So but the impact of that is not immediately observable. Okay, so that is why I say these are a complicated set of topics which are continuously interacting with each other, and you cannot fix the responsibility on a single person, uh, who is the authority, the single person who can be the authority on any of these things as far as the organizational performance is concerned. Now if you look at suppose effective working capital management, does it have advantages? Does it have advantage in the short run or in the long run? Now what is the short run advantage that you can have? see, if your working capital management is not that good, you cannot run your company on a day to day basis. For example, there could be and not enough inventory available, so there could be production stoppages. There could be liquidity issues for which you have not made payment to your supplier, so the supplier doesn't supply you with the material. So there could be several scenarios like this. Well, are there any advantages in the long run? Now, in the long run, you can control the working capital levels after the fiscal year, but they quickly climb back again. So that in the long run, that will also have an impact on the asset position of the farm. Now, having understood how to optimize the working capital in the SMEs, we look at now. See, what are the I mean determinants of the working capital. While we talk about this, the working capital in the SME. Now you see the while we talk about the determinants, we can talk about the, for example, the farm specific factors or the owner specific factors. Now, when we talk about the farm specific factors, the age of the farm is a major determinant, because for the small companies, the farm age is usually used as a proxy for the length of relationship between suppliers and customers. Okay, so as well as the credit worthiness to support the suppliers. Now, any supplier, when you approach him for credit, he will look at your track record. Now, if your company is 5 years old, vis-a-vis it is 10 years or 12 years old, then the supplier will probably have more faith on the farm which is older. Okay, so 10 12 years farm will have a slight advantage over a newer farm. Now, the age definitely has a favorable impact on the working capital requirement. How can we explain that? It can be explained that the small businesses, they obtain the loan very quickly, better on better terms, and who have a very good relationship with their financiers. Now, when we talk about the next factor, that is the size of the farm. Now, the obviously the farm size has a big impact on the volume of working capital. Now, if you're micro or small or medium, the farm size is going to be different. No, see, it has been understood. It is accepted fact that a larger farm will always have a larger working capital requirement due to the presence of a bigger operating cycle. So the bigger the size of your farm, bigger will be the working capital. Then you talk about this leverage. Now, the farms which have more physical assets, they will require more source of funding. Now, while we talk about source of funding, you can always have debenture in that. Debt capital in that, and the employment of debt. Now, see, you can have a software farm where the physical assets are less. You can also have a manufacturing farm where the physical assets will be more. Now, when we're talking about the physical assets, for the to acquire the physical assets, you need require fund in the beginning, and so you can be dependent on the debt capital. Now, debt capital means you are incurring some kind of a fixed financial charge, and fixed financial charge will always lead to the financial leverage. So, the moment you have financial leverage, you are taking up huge amount of risk on your farm. Okay, so what kind of financial leverage you can accommodate or you can afford will also determine your working capital requirement. Of course, there is the concept of the foreign sales. Now, you can have foreign sales, you cannot have foreign sales. But when we're talking about comparing companies which have foreign sales vis-a-vis which do not have foreign sales, now you see, when you're talking about suppose you have a client in, let us say, China. Okay, and in China, the sales is happening, and you are getting the yuan as your you are getting your remittance in the form of yuan. So the exchange rate there will play a big role in your cash management. Okay, so see, because you might have sold goods worth 1 million. Okay, yeah, 1 million rupees, but the exchange rate of yuan to Indian currency will ensure that at the time of receiving the fund, it might not be 1 million, it might be more than 1 million, might be less than 1 million, depending on whether the yuan has strengthened or has weakened. So, the foreign exchange will have a big role in the cash management of your fund. So that will also have a impact on your basically the farms engaged in the exports, they will be impacted, the working capital will be impacted by the foreign sales. Now we also have this this might look very peculiar, but you also have these owner specific factors. Now gender of the owner also has an impact, because we know human attitude and behavior influence the financial decision making, and it has been seen that there's a huge difference between the risk perception between the male and the females, and it has been seen that the female business managers are prone to taking less risk as compared to their male counterpart while dealing with the financial matters. Okay, and without sounding condescending, there can be, I can safely say that there have been studies in which it has been seen that female business managers are more likely to experience financial difficulties as compared to their male counterparts. Okay, then you also talk about the education of your manager. The highly educated persons are thought to make more informed decisions because they have all the tools and techniques available with them. The managerial education, such as these MBA educations and all, this is also considered critical component for increase in productivity for in this fast changing environment, and also becoming efficient in working capital management. You also have the experience of the manager. Once he has experience, naturally you can talk about he has already dealt with these kind of experiences, so he can be an efficient manager, and he can if with an experienced manager, you can talk about aggressive management of working capital, so low liquidity will be good. But if you have a amateur, not amateur, if you have a less experienced manager, then he will always look for higher amount of current asset if he is operating with working capital. Yeah, apart from that, you have several behavioral biases. Now, what are these behavioral biases? Now, you see, we are all these theories that we're talking about in terms of all these theories have one central piece in common, that we're assuming that the individuals, they behave rationally. Rationality of human beings is at the core of all these financial discussions that we're making. Now, the question is, are human beings really rational? Do they take the similar kind of decisions under different constraints? Now, when we're talking about rationality, it basically means that an individual will always pursue the low risk and will always pursue the high return. Okay, so I'm just in the words of layman, it is you are pursuing the low risk. An individual, under all circumstances, he will pursue the low risk and the high return avenues. But it has been seen that human beings actually don't always behave don't always behave in a rational fashion. There are examples of so many biases that an individual that an individual displays. One of the biases there are the psychologist, the behavioral psychologist, they have listed several biases on the part of human beings. We'll just discuss one or two, like something called a self-attribution bias. Now, it is also known as a self-serving bias. This is a cognitive bias where the individuals attribute their success to internal factors like their own talent, their own effort, while they always blame the external factors such as the luck, the other people's failure, that my team did not work, so we could not achieve the target, but my efforts were good, my talent is good. So this is called the self-attribution bias. You can have something called like an anchoring bias, where your people have a tendency to rely heavily on the first piece of information and that they receive on the topic. So they get anchored to the first phase of research. This kind of a behavioral bias we must have seen, or we all must have experienced when we go shopping. Now if I go shopping to for my clothes, now the first piece of clothing item that I like, let us say after looking at 5 6 clothing items, one clothing item I like really, but I will not buy it at that point of time. I will subsequently see another 10 15 clothing items, and out of that 10 15 also I will be liking a few more. But then there is a tendency to, it has been observed in many individuals, they will always go back to the first thing that they liked. Okay, so that is called the anchoring. So the anchoring will also have a big impact on the working capital decision, because you will anchor your decision to the first thing, the first strategy that you like, not to the optimal strategy. You will anchor your decision to the first strategy that you liked. Or if you have self attribution bias, you will talk about that, well, I have devised this strategy, so it must be good. Okay, so this kind of biases, human beings are amenable to all these kinds of biases. So even if we have studied enough about the various factors that affect the working capital decisions, these biases will ensure that the optimality is not reached in this working capital decision. Now, when we're talking about these various components of working capital decision for the SMEs, see, these components are same for all the firms, for the large firms as well as the SMEs. The inventory management or the credit management or the cash management. Now you see, but for the small farms, the potential consequence of a stock out or excess stock. Excess stock is not the case for the SME. Excess stock is the case for large farms. But the consequence of a stock out, which is very high for the SMEs, that is very bad. For example, the SMEs, if they do not have enough amount of stock, that is raw material stock or finished good stock, if you do not have enough finished good stock, you will lose out on the immediate sales. And the immediate sales, you're not losing on that particular sale, you are also losing out on the future sales. Similarly, if you have lesser amount of raw material, then there could be several production stoppages, and a production stoppage is a very costly affair, because if your production stops, there could be so many other costs that will snowball. For example, I mean, the labor will sit idle, though you have to make payment, but your labor will sit idle. Sometimes there are some machines like furnaces and all, which need to be operated even if you don't have raw material, be operated, and there will be cost involved. So the stock out has a big I mean loss, big cost associated with it, and that is very high for a SME. So if SMEs cannot afford to have stock out conditions, so you must be dependent on good ordering quantity, and your the kind of ordering that you are doing has to be appropriate. So you have to do this EOQ ordering, or you have to depend on the just in time kind of policies. In just in time, you have maintained such a supply chain with your I mean the supplier of raw material, that we can procure the material within a very short period of time. Let us say with 1 day's notice, you can get the material to your place. So you can have a just-in-time inventory through this very good relationship with your suppliers. Similarly, in the previous slides, we talked about the credit management, like the influence of the supplier relationship, the kind of collection efforts that we have, and all these things. We talked about that, the credit management part. We also talked about this cash management part, like the SMEs are in perpetual need of cash. Okay, but at the same time, they also have limited access to the financial market. So they always have a perpetual problem with the liquidity. So the for SME, this cash management is of utmost importance, because you don't fall back on the money market to get loans. Most of the time, you will approach the banks for a short-term loan, or you will be dependent on the trade credit. Now, for trade, to get a good amount of trade credit, you need to have a very good relationship with your suppliers and your clients, and you also need to have a good banking relationship with your banker. Now, obviously, to be effective for working capital, you need to reduce your inventory to various accurate forecasting and logistics, and you have to also secure very good credit terms from your suppliers to be very effective in the working capital management. I think with this, we'll stop today's discussion regarding the working capital management of SMEs. Thank you.